All right. Happy Thursday, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We have a really great duo of speakers today, and we cannot wait to get the show on the road and ask them a couple questions. But first, my name is Andrew Whipp, and I am the lead creative and editor at Greenbuzz Agency. And I'm also joined by my friend and colleague, Todd Plotkin, who is the CEO and founder of Greenbuzz Agency. Todd, how are you doing today?
I am doing fantastic. How are you, Andrew?
I'm great. I'm excited for today. I got an old friend on the line here in James Williams, who I used to work with at Discovery. So very excited to hear what he has to say. And also I've met Shawna a couple times. Very excited to hear what she has to say. So yeah, I'm amped. As a quick aside, if any of our audience members somehow ended up here and don't know who we are or what we do, Greenbuzz Agency is a full-service production company based out of Old Town Alexandria, and we specialize in documentary, motion graphics, and branded content. So if you or your teams are curious about the process of making a video or are just looking to tell your own story, please don't hesitate to reach out. We also want to give a quick shout out to the Streaming Wars newsletter for helping us get the word out about today's webinar. So if you want to check them out and get some OTT strategy directly to your inbox, visit 43, that's the numbers 4320, spelled out TWENTY.TV. Bringing it back around, today's webinar is the 10th, the big 1-0 in our Greenbuzz Agency webinar series, which was created to connect our community with thought leaders who can help us break down top-line strategy, best practices, and great advice during these really weird and strange times. So today we'll be covering the topic of how to capitalize on the changing ways that we consume content. So if you're looking to stay on top of media trends and bring some new ideas back to your teams, then you are absolutely in the right place. So now it's time for the panelist introductions. Today we are joined by Shawna Thomas and James Williams. Shawna is a content development executive at Quibi and a political contributor to NBC News and MSNBC. Shawna opened Vice News DC Bureau, where she served as bureau chief for 3 years and served as the senior producer and senior digital editor for NBC's Meet the Press. Her works garnered 4 Emmy wins, a Peabody, a Gracie Award, and 2 Scripps Howard Awards. And James is the executive director of digital strategy at PBS NewsHour. And before joining PBS, James served as the VP of digital video at Nat Geo and the senior development producer for Discovery Channel. His work in digital storytelling has made him a Pulitzer finalist, an Emmy winner, and a 13-time Webby winner. So thank you both for swinging by today. Thank you for all the insights and experiences that you're going to share with us. And with all that out of the way, I think we should just jump right in. Sean, I'll pass it over to you.
Hey, thanks for having me and thanks for doing this. So first, for those of you who don't know, and I know there are some people still out there who don't know what Quibi is. Quibi stands for Quick Bites, and we consider it short form premium content. Jeffrey Katzenberg hates it when I call it this, but it is a little bit like Netflix for your phone, except for a couple of differences. One, there is daily programming on it, which is what I primarily work on for Quibi. 2, it plays in horizontal and vertical full screen, and you have the ability to shift back and forth. That is called turnstile technology. And 3, it's out there, so you should sign up and try it out. There's something for everyone on the platform. But what I specifically want to talk about and what I was hired to develop primarily what is news content. What we had to think about is not only like what we want to be, but what we aren't. So the big question I had to keep in mind as we were working with some of our major news partners, which include NBC News, BBC News, and CBS News, and on the West Coast side, because I'm based on the East Coast, they're working with Telemundo News as well, and we work with Vox. But a big thing is, how is the content we're going to make the viewer smarter? The things that we knew for sure, that it had to be quick, 5 to 6 minute range. Everything on the platform, every episode is 10 minutes or less. But we wanted to keep news in the 5 to 6 minute range. It needed to be visual, since you are going to hold your phone in your hand at all times and it's in your face. How you use visuals and how you use graphics become really, really important. A really big thing for me was that we wanted it to be different from the linear broadcasts that those companies already provide, as well as different from what they provide on their websites. We wanted to tap into the resources of NBC News and BBC News and their access to stories all around the world and all around the country. but we did not want it to look or sound necessarily like the NBC Nightly News or what you might see if you're on vacation in London. And then a big thing, we wanted to gear this towards a younger audience. We are aiming for Gen Z and millennials, but there are also a couple of things that make it a little bit harder. One, we're not trying to be live breaking news. We don't have that capability. So if you can't respond to the news as fast as, let's say, MSNBC or what you get on your phone via Twitter or via Facebook, that means you have to value add. And that comes back to the question of how does this make the viewer smarter? So I think the first thing we tried to tackle was that difference. How do we make this different than what is offered on linear? And a lot of that does have to do with the visuals. The first, the vertical and horizontal. What it kind of meant for us is we had to go to these companies and try to figure out the best way for them to shoot the video that they needed to shoot while thinking about both orientations of the phone. It sounds like really easy and really simple when I say it like that, but it did mean that some of these companies had to actually install new equipment or buy new equipment or think about what is it going to take to shoot in what's known as 4K or 6K, which allows you to manipulate the imagery and edit. Since we were building something that wasn't necessarily for a live audience, while we were still planning on using studios pre-COVID, we were going to build these shows sort of in edit the whole time. And if you're going to do that, how you shoot it and how much data it uses and how you think about vertical and horizontal becomes really, really important. So we had lots of meetings with these companies sort of showing what we thought to be the best practices before Quibi launched, and how to think about, like, before you go out in the field to shoot something, what you need to storyboard it out and really think about both angles when you are shooting. The other thing is, especially the big companies, NBC and BBC, have built-in graphics departments. But as we were building the staffs, and each of these companies built out specific staffs just for these shows, we had lots of rounds of input on what the graphics are going to look like. And where we sort of decided in both of these shows is that a very clear visual language and a very clear color scheme, which I'll show you on the next slide, is really, really important. Without a lot of space, like on your, huge 60-inch TVs in your living rooms to play with, you want to make sure that you can catch the audience's eye, that when they see it, they know this is the visual language of like what NBC News is trying to do on this particular platform, but you want it to be sort of simple. And these are examples from one episode from last week where they were talking about the 75th anniversary of the bombing in Hiroshima. And this is sort of the language we decided on, is that like each story within an episode has these very clear chapter cards with a very clear title. They sort of slide in and off, and we choose sort of an impactful image that we've color treated. I'm not saying this is how everybody has to do it, but we found that, especially because we needed to build out a toolkit that could be used very quickly as they turn these episodes around every day, that this sort of looked and felt simple enough, but like would keep the audience's attention, and that it was repeatable throughout an episode. And I just come back to this idea that the screen is small and that there's only sort of so much you can do on it. So you have to be very clear about what it is you want the audience to take away from it and what you want to show. And this is sort of how BBC decided to think about how they were going to keep the audience's eyes on the phone. The other thing we always had to consider, or we are still considering actually, as we still continue to develop and refine these shows, is that it is very easy to get distracted, and even more so to get distracted when we are all at home and still using our phones, but also have our TVs, have our laptops. I think I have 5 devices around me right now to do my work. Originally, Quibi was thought of as a concept for people on the go. We wanted to sort of occupy your in-between time. So if you were in line at Starbucks, maybe you pull out and you watch a Quibi and for 5 or 6 minutes and then order your latte. If you're on the subway, you can download the episodes of whatever news shows you like, watch it on the subway. And then when you go into your office, then you go on to whatever it is you have to do for work. But we still wanted to make sure, because even your phone has lots of things that can distract you, like a new text message comes in, a new tweet from the President of the United States, whatever. We wanted to keep figuring out ways to draw your eye back to the content that's playing. And sort of one thing that BBC News decided to do, on the left, the info card. So that usually comes up at the end of their very first story. And what we did was we actually make sure that the anchor is not talking over that info card. And our theory behind that was actually having pauses in audio, even as when the anchor is talking, they're usually talking at sort of a faster pace, because these episodes, we want them to move fast, we want them to feel different than linear. But when you take breaks in that, that actually draws the audience's eye back to the content. So that was one thing that we devised specifically for this show. On the right, BBC also devised sort of a narrative text. And you see this a lot in sort of Vox explainers, or kind of how Now This News does stuff. But when they really want to punctuate something and also make sure the audience remembers that the video is playing and they haven't gotten distracted, they will time this text to come up as you're hearing these things. Now, they don't use it too much. They use it sort of sparingly, but it is to just add little points of impact. And this was done specifically for us. The other thing that we spent a lot of time thinking about, because these are anchored, they are anchored shows, which makes it a little bit like linear, but we thought it would just be in some ways easier to produce every day. There are a couple of tropes that are hard to get away from if you are trying to do this sort of faster turnaround. And we talked a lot about the personal nature of your phone, and that people use it to FaceTime and they do Instagram stories on their phone and that kind of thing. And we tried to take some lessons from what is already out there on social and the technology of your phone, and made this sort of clear decision that we would frame the anchors a little bit closer than I think I even initially felt comfortable with, to be honest, so that it feels like maybe they are actually talking to you as you're FaceTiming. And I think we finally came around to, and I will say I give this one to Jeffrey Katzenberg. He hammered this home, and I ended up agreeing with it in the end, that you want to feel like you're having a conversation. Now, how the shows are written speaks to that, how the shows are written with a sort of younger tone speaks to that, but it makes it feel different than what you get on television. And that conversational tone, we still wanted people to be authoritative. So you can see in this image, Ben Bland from the BBC is still wearing a jacket but no tie. We go back and forth on what is the right look for these things. But the key is that he's sort of in your face and he is trying to talk to you. I think another big thing, especially in news, where people go back and forth on this, is like the use of music. And music adds to the pacing. It makes it feel faster. It makes the episodes move, because what we're trying to sell you is that in the idea that it's Quibi, quick bites, like you're going to get a lot of information in a short amount of time. And music just helps it feel like everything is sort of going at a faster pace. And like on the NBC Nightly News, they do not use music in their packages unless it's something really, really special. Documentaries tend to use music a lot, and we sort of just decided to steal that, and that we would try to enhance these episodes and make them feel different by using kind of just music beds. And then the other thing that comes back to the editorial of this is, if you can't respond immediately to something, then you have to do deeper fact research, deeper analysis into something. And at least in a couple of the stories, make sure you are adding value to that story to make the person want to watch. There's a lot of different types of content on Quibi's platform, and we're all playing in the same pool, but I would lie if I didn't say I wasn't competitive with, the scripted and alternative content. And I think the value proposition that I am trying to sell is that I will actually make you, or BBC and NBC will make you smarter and give you that nugget of information, even in a short amount of time, that if we were still in offices and we had things like water coolers and kitchens and coffee machines, that if you were talking about something with people, you could recall something from our show that maybe not everyone knew or heard, and you get to look smarter and also hopefully be smarter. But all of that plays into trying to develop something for your phone, where there, like I said, is a lot of competition for for your attention. And then it came down to, okay, if that's what we want to do, what do we need to do this? And, in one example I have is that because we knew we were going to do a lot of graphics and a lot of the show would be built and edit in a way that you don't see on TV very often, unless it is sort of a docu-series show. NBC runs on Avid. And I don't know how, if I'm being too technical for this audience, but since I'm just talking, I'm going to keep being kind of technical. But NBC News runs on Avid as their editing system. And that we decided did not work as well as Premiere for what we needed to do. Also, Premiere made it easier, or Adobe actually made it easier to be able to edit in vertical and horizontal and be able to make those two versions a little bit faster than we thought we would be able to make them. So we actually built out a new workflow at NBC for this with new systems, new servers, everybody on Premiere. And then we hired editors specifically to do this project that both I and the showrunner had experience with, who sort of kind of understood the visual language we were going for. And I mentioned this before, also both companies hired graphics teams to only work on this. And I think the reason why I tell people that is because I think with a lot of even media companies that are doing all kinds of different things, people think that you can sort of take what you did on linear TV, or take what you did over here for Instagram, or take what you did over here for something else, and you can repurpose it all across without making a lot of changes. And I think that's a lot of times the wrong way to think about this. I think if we were working with NBC or BBC and they were like, oh, this team for this show can just do this in the extra 2 hours they have, we would have failed. We are literally putting these shows together differently than they put anything else together at NBC or BBC. And it became very, very clear that we needed just a dedicated audience with certain specific skills, along with the editorial producers, reporters, all of that kind of stuff, to build something specific for us. And I think, one, that is a somewhat expensive proposition, but two, I think that's the only way you're going to kind of get this bespoke content for a new platform, that you have to really think what is the staffing I need to do this? How much is that going to cost? And am I actually going to go ahead and spend that and commit to this idea of building something new? And I think you really do have to think about each platform you're working on. And in my case, I'm working on Quibi, but you have to think about which platform this is, how are things going to look on that platform, and what is the staff I need to build that. And then I think a big thing for the editorial and both of the staffs at these companies who are doing great jobs is I wanted to make sure that the teams were representative of the audience that we wanted. If we want millennials and Gen Zers to watch these shows, it's really important to have younger people. And it doesn't have to be the whole team. I'm not saying don't hire anyone over the age of 40, I'm almost 40. But you really need people on your staff who are willing to speak up and be like, this is what interests me, or you know what, this is why I don't like the show because this and this and this. You can't make something that is representative of your audience if your audience isn't actually working for you. Now, all of that is great, and all of that planning was happening before our April 6th launch. And then the pandemic happened. And what that meant in the case of both of these shows, and as you've seen on TV a lot, is we had to figure out how to do all of those things I just talked about. How does the new editing system interface with the servers, all of the graphics people working on the shows, all of the editors working on the shows, the anchors, the correspondents? How are we going to do that from home? And we didn't start that process until everyone was sufficiently freaked out in New York by the pandemic. So I would say around the second week of March, we decided to modify the workflows. Some of that was brought on by, cases of COVID at some of the major companies that we were working for. I mentioned CBS News, and they're not in this particular presentation, but they do a version of 60 and 6. And if you go ahead and download Quibi, putting in another plug there, they have an episode on there that talks about their particular sort of fight with COVID. And they were probably the first cluster, the CBS News team working on the show specifically for Quibi, was probably the first cluster of COVID cases in New York. And that was an example of a show that we literally just had to shut down because a lot of their staff actually got sick. But in the case of NBC and BBC, luckily their staffs didn't get sick, but they all did have to go home. So we spent, and NBC spent a lot of sleepless nights getting people set up in their homes, trying to do it safely. And that involved, a modified iPad setup, tripods, lights, different types of microphones, figuring out how the anchor would upload themselves to the server so that the editors would have actual access. We changed actually the time that our evening shows post because we literally just needed more time to be able to move material and move files. We definitely set a lot of people's homes up with faster internet because we just were having a hard time communicating and moving files. But it was one of those things that as we went, we were at the point where we could focus on the technical part of like, how do you get someone on TV from home? Because we had already laid this groundwork of what we wanted the show to look like and what the design templates were and how we wanted the show to sound. So a lot of that work was done. And now it just became sort of this terrible sleepless night logistics nightmare about how do we actually get these shows on the air. And I will say on April 6th, all of our shows got on the air and we made it. Did they look and sound as good as they would have had they been coming from BBC's broadcast center in London or 30 Rockefeller Center? Not quite. And so we're still tweaking and working on that. But I think because we did just a lot of development work beforehand, when we were thrown the curveball, we were in a place to be able to focus on what the curveball meant instead of trying to do it all at the same time. And I am going to stop there because I've taken up enough time.
Sure thing. Hello, everybody. So I'm James with PBS NewsHour. And on the digital team at NewsHour, we essentially serve three audiences. We serve the broadcast audience, we serve a digital audience, and the social audience. And I'm breaking them out into those specific categories because I recognize that these days you can really mix and match all of those. But I have this arranged in the way that I think about audiences today, and that's from the psychological sort of orientation in which they're going to the platform to get the content. In other words, a broadcast audience of who's watching the NewsHour is ready to commit up to an hour of their time to get that information. And in the digital side of things, we support that audience by making the full episode available every night on our website and YouTube. In digital, I'm thinking of that in terms of the website, podcasts, newsletters, and that's somebody who's willing to commit up, somewhere probably between 10 to 20 minutes of their time, perhaps, to digging into the reporting that we're putting out there. And then social is going to be much faster. That's an audience that tends to engage very quickly and then move on. I'm thinking about Twitter. I'm thinking about Instagram. Some of the stuff that we're posting on YouTube, Facebook. And as we approach all of these things, we're starting at the place of we've got reporting that we want to put out there. And the question is, how do we best serve these audiences by tailoring the content appropriately and making sure that we're delivering on the promise of the NewsHour? So the story of quarantine for us actually begins on November 13th, 2019. And that's because that's day one of the Trump impeachment hearings. And I say that because although we've been doing live streaming for years, and we know for a fact that this is a large driver of engagement, the impeachment offered us an opportunity to essentially take the focus of the entire digital team, put it towards one project for a concerted amount of time. So we knew that this was going to be a huge lift, that there was going to be a lot of reporting coming from a lot of different places, and one of the things that we wanted to do was engage our audience, and this was going to be an opportunity. And we knew going into this that there was going to be a lot to learn. One of the tenets of being in digital is to constantly test and look for that information in real time that you're getting back from the audience around what's working and what isn't. And this was definitely one of those opportunities. So as we think about how we wanted to differentiate ourselves, we knew that there were going to be a lot of news organizations that were going to be streaming the impeachment hearing. We wanted to focus on two things. I mean, one, we knew that our audience was going to come to us for the impeachment content. So we wanted to make sure that we were optimized for that in the places we knew they were going to be looking. So that includes YouTube in terms of titles and thumbnails. But the other thing that we had control over was how much we actually engaged with our audience. And this is where we started to experiment with the live chat function in YouTube. We wanted to be authentic there. So we started with, if I'm somebody just coming across as I want to have the live stream going on, what's the information that I'm going to find useful in order to stick around and choose the NewsHour live stream over others? And we decided that that would be one, for us to be able to share critical context around who's speaking, give intros, give backgrounds, talk about what's happened with the prosecutors or the Congress folks that were asking the questions. And then we also got some of our internal subject matter experts involved in the conversation. And between those two things, we felt like we put on a pretty strong offering for our audience, and they seemed to respond. We generally, over the course of the impeachments, would rank anywhere from first to third in terms of views and concurrent views at that. So we were able to get our audience present and hold on to them. But the other thing we wanted to start looking at is, how do we not just do this on one platform? How can we take what we're doing in these live streams and branch it out so that we can reach a wider audience and bring them back into the fold of the NewsHour, where we can introduce them to other forms of our strong reporting. So we put on their website, we were able to incorporate the chat into the homepage of our website. And that was sort of the start of some further experimentations. So by day 3, we were continuing to branch out. One of the advantages that we had in the live stream was the broadcast was also, they had their own show going on where so in other words, there would be a break in the impeachment hearing, and then we would go to a live show in the studio, and then we were able to cut back to the impeachment hearings when those began. So that put us on the front page of Twitter during that day. And you can see the concurrent viewers that we had below that. We were getting people, and they were sticking around for the entire thing, which was another thing we wanted to see. We were also getting some really strong engagement with our live streams on Facebook, and then we continued to double down on our live chats. And one of the things that we really liked about our setup, and this was something that had been a challenge up until this point, is how do you open up comments and do it in a way that you're not inviting trolls? Because we know that when we open comments up in a heated political atmosphere that we're in today, it very, very quickly devolves into something that is just not palatable for our audience, or any audience for that matter. And we wanted to make sure that those that tuned in to us were able to focus on what they came to see, which is the impeachment hearings and getting information. So we started to devise a system where we would only let certain people into the chat. And as a result, we would then, we could mitigate most of that, but we weren't finding, we still did not get the audience interaction that we were looking for. So what we started to do then is take advantage of some of the other elements that were offered on YouTube. One way that we knew we could capture sentiments and questions from our audience in a way that we could control was through the YouTube community tab. And previously, this was something that we had done a little bit of experimentation with. You can put, it's on the YouTube platform, but it's kind of out of the way. And if you're not looking for it, you wouldn't necessarily find it. But it does go out to all of your subscribers. And so we started to promote what we were doing on the live stream from there. But then we started putting a call out for questions. And when we started to do that, we were able to take the questions, not show them publicly to anybody, but we were able to pull the questions that were thoughtful and advance the conversation. We could then bring it back to the YouTube chat, answer the question there, then come back to the community tab and post the answers there. And that really started to build a two-way conversation with our audience that we were really looking for. So through all of this, what did we learn? We knew that our audience was looking for live streams. And I'll say in the case of the impeachment, it was not lost on us that the NewsHour began with the Watergate hearings, and that there was an expectation that we were going to provide a similar service in this case, and we felt that we absolutely did. We streamed every single one of the hearings from start to finish all the way through. We knew that our audience was engaged and that they had questions. So this was something that was top of mind, and we very much appreciate our audience, and we wanted to make sure that we could give to them as much as we could. We also realized that the more that you can leverage lesser known platform opportunities, the better. In this case, we were able to start bringing these questions from other areas. It gave us sort of a way to filter the questions and get them into our conversations in a way that that we could control and didn't expose us to a lot of the nastiness that can occur when you just leave a chat completely open. Some of the other learnings we had is that just by paying attention to your audience in this manner, it increases the reach of your content and ultimately views. So we are pretty sure that the result of our engagement in the live chat helped keep people on the platform longer. And I think both of those things sent signals to the YouTube algorithm, which helped place us higher in the search when people were looking for which live stream to watch. However, just because you put a lot of money or resources into something doesn't always equal views. So I don't think there's a correlation to spending a lot of money on content and necessarily getting the views once you cross a threshold that is acceptable in terms of quality. But what I mean by that is that in some cases we could have gone live, done a pre-show where we brought folks into the studio, done that for an hour beforehand, at beginning at say 8 o'clock, and I'm not sure that that would have actually increased our views. People weren't coming for the pre-show; they were coming for the hearings most of the time. And by delivering that, making sure that we were ready to go and had a really strong offering at that point, when the hearings began, I think that's where we got some real payoff. And this is something that I've seen across my time in digital. There are plenty of shows where you spend a ton of money; it doesn't necessarily equal views. It's more, at the end of the day, it really just comes down to the audience. Think of what the audience wants. What do they need? What are they looking for? And deliver on that. And that's how you're going to get your views. And then finally, it just confirmed the expectation that we knew people had about PBS NewsHour. They were looking for responsible reporting, in-depth reporting. They were expecting us to step up when it came to these hearings. And we felt like we delivered on all of that. Okay, so coming out of the impeachment hearings, we continued to double down on this idea. We started opening up quizzes for on that community tab as well. In this case, we put something up for the Iowa caucuses, and we got 25,000 votes, which is not nothing. I mean, when we started getting these numbers, we put other ones up that had up to 50,000. To me, that just tells me that there is an audience out there that is really, really ready to engage. And then we continued to do our special coverage and do the live stream there. And we began to open up the comments for a bit. On YouTube, you can actually delay the amount of time that somebody can comment. So you drop a comment in, you won't be able to do anything for another 5 minutes. So we began to loosen up a little bit in terms of the commenting and doing it in a way that we could really moderate what was happening there. As we were gearing up for all of our coverage, we move into March, and March 10th, this was our last in-house live stream. We were covering the mini Tuesday primary results. And here you can see this, it's sort of all in motion here. You've got the comments open. We're driving engagement. We've got some really strong original reporting with Lisa Desjardins and Daniel Bush on the digital team. And then this was also mixed in with what was coming from broadcast. So we felt like we were really reaching a large audience with this one. And then on March 11th, the digital team ran an experiment to see if we could work from home. And we haven't been back since. Everybody went home with their laptops that night. And that was Wednesday. By Thursday morning, the news was just starting to come in that things were looking pretty rough in terms of the spread of coronavirus, and we have not gone back. However, because we're the digital team and we were used to working with a lot of tools that can be used remotely, the main changes that we saw had more to do with just switching some of the live streaming technology that we were using to coordinate. But for the most part, everything that we were doing was already oriented towards remote working in that respect, and so it wasn't a huge lift. So once events started unfolding under quarantine, we kind of took what we had learned and we really started to blow it out across platforms. So we started to think about where our audience were and how we could take some of the reporting that we were getting in from the live streams and find a wider audience. So we continued to do polls and drive, in this case, 81,000 votes for stories around coronavirus. We could then take that information and fold that into some of the live streams that we were doing with some of our correspondents. We were then, when we started doing live stream Q&A sessions with, in this case, this is William Brangham, and that allowed us, we would stream these out to Facebook, to YouTube, to Twitter, and we would get real-time comments from our audience. We have a team of folks behind the scenes that are aggregating questions and comments from our audiences, putting them into a document that then we can feed to our on-air correspondents. And as a result of that, we have this instant turnaround across platforms with wide reach. We're getting questions that we know are relevant to our audience. And then we can take those segments and we can repurpose those for Instagram. We can repurpose those for Facebook or for YouTube, knowing that these are questions that our audience is really looking to have answered during a very uncertain time. And then we had George Floyd, and we had all the protest movements behind that, and we had just this greater awareness of so many different issues. In this case, this is an example of how we took these weekly live stream Q&As using all of those elements that we pulled from our earlier experience in the impeachment and really put this out across platform, trying to bring as many people as we can into the NewsHour fold, knowing that if they come in from, say, YouTube, or they come in from Instagram, they may see us on Twitter, they may see us on Facebook, they may see us on the website and discover the reporting that we're doing there as well. So in this case, we had the live stream Q&A, we're getting questions from the audience, and then we're breaking that up into Facebook segments, we're breaking them up into Instagram segments. We have a whole section on the website, a whole page where we're explaining it out that way. So in our view, we're not only reaching folks across these different platforms, but in so many different forms, depending on how much time you wanted to give to this subject, we could meet the audience where they're at. The other thing that we were doing, so that kind of covers, how we took something that was longer form and broke that into something that was could be found on some of these platforms where there is shorter amount of time spent. We also looked for the opportunities where we could grow. And we saw signals that Instagram had some high growth potential for us. And so as we moved into April and then into March, when we moved into March, this is an opportunity where the team had just begun to invest more energy and into the platform, and we really doubled down in that. And you can see the volume of post counts that we had begun just jumping up dramatically in March and April and after that. And the way that we were doing this was being very relevant. So Wyatt Mays and Yamiche Asindor went downtown during the DC protests, and they shot this amazing Instagram stories. We began putting up very highly visual, very relevant questions and graphics. You can see we did post interviews from reporting elsewhere on the site that we were bringing into Instagram, and we were following the kinds of things that we knew worked. We knew that those quick graphics could work, and so we did it in a style that was cohesive with everything else that we were putting on the platform. We were doing titled video segments that made it really easy for folks to know what they were going to get. So we were able to set the expectation before they click into it. They click into it and boom, it's exactly what they thought it was going to be. And it fulfilled the expectations that they had. And the result of this is a just massive rise in interactions. And we also saw a really big spike in followers. So I think we had 192,000 followers in June 19. And right now, I think we're up at almost 340 and continuing to grow. And for us, it was just an exercise of, again, giving your audience the attention and understanding what's relevant to your audience and what they're looking for to learn, and being able to deliver on that. Our main takeaways for this, and I would say, if you've been in digital or you're just getting into digital, these are the kinds of things that really, if you practice these, they're gonna pay off. So first thing is just test and follow what works. All of the elements that we put into our coverage, they're either coming from hunches based on things that we've seen one thing that we did, actually, I'll just tell this side story, but there was one day where we were streaming, I think it was one of the hearings and on Facebook, and I think there was a glitch in the feed, and the feed cut off. So we had to restart it during one of the breaks. And the second stream that we started actually performed as well or better than the first one. Okay, so what at first we saw was an accident or an error, got some interesting results. And so we said, all right, that's interesting. Let's test it again. Can we create that? And we did. And what we discovered was a new best practice. If you want to get people's attention and reach more people in your feed, in one of those events, when there's a break, there is no harm in starting a new feed and reaching a new set of audience, because when you do that, Facebook is alerting a new section of your audience that there's a new feed going. So that kind of thinking is just critical in advancing your audience and reaching your viewers on any platform. The second thing is to create and deliver on audience expectations. This is just digital 101. Put a great title out there, put a good thumbnail out there, and do it again and again and again. Do the same kind of post over and over again. And what you're gonna get is an audience that's expecting the same thing tomorrow. And when you do that and you deliver on it, it's gonna make them much more likely to click on you again and give you a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth chance until they become a loyal follower. I mean, one of the things that Shawna noted in her work is how they set up the screens on vertical. And when you see those and it makes sense, you see it again and it makes sense, it just makes it so much easier to set that expectation. And when people like what they see, they're going to come back time and time again. The next thing is just be relevant. And this seems like a simple thing, but it's so important, and it's not always something folks get right. But if it's not interesting to you, or if you can't say why anybody would want to watch, listen, read, etc., then you can't expect your audience to do that either. So for us, like, relevance was, it was relevant to the impeachment hearings that we gave the background on who Val Demings was and her experience as a police chief in Florida, and that was relevant to that whole conversation when we went out of our way to make sure we had very strong coverage around the protests, and it's just something that's super important across the board. And then finally, one thing I would just say that we really learned in this case was how important it is, or can be, to leverage platform opportunities that may seem like something that isn't maybe a top priority, but in a lot of ways, these platform opportunities, like the YouTube polls, every platform has some offerings out there that they're kind of putting in front of their audience and trying out, and those can be great opportunities for an organization, especially if you're not a huge organization, to get in on the ground floor and start to design what that ultimately looks like. On YouTube is experimenting with YouTube stories, which is another thing that we started using more and more. And we found that we could get anywhere from 100 to 200,000 views on the first slide. And all we're doing is taking segments, repurposing segments that we had built during those Q&A live streams that are really important. And we now think, like, okay, this is important. We want to make sure our audience sees this. What is Juneteenth? Let's make sure that we're going to get 150,000 people to take a look at this on YouTube. And had we not been interested and curious about what those opportunities would lead to, we would never have that new section of our audience to work with and develop. And that is it. That is believe that is all the slides that I have.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for sharing all your insights. And I think now is actually a great time to transition over to the audience-led Q&A. I'll kick it over to Todd for the first question.
Yeah, definitely. I am looking at the Q&A section right now. The very first question that came in that was asked during Shawna's presentation to Shawna was, what advice would you give to someone whose team management is determined to make content across as many platforms as possible with the same team? So Shawna, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what you mean by as many platforms as possible. And and James should feel free to jump in. I think if we're talking about the same team is making linear TV, is also making videos for your website, is also making Instagram videos, is also making Facebook videos, then you start to run into a problem. But if you have a dedicated, and I do think, especially major media companies or smaller media companies, or even some of the smaller productions that I have helped to develop that are with LA production companies versus like the NBC Newses and the BBCs of the world. I have made a request that those smaller production companies need to hire someone for their show, their specific show, and on their staff to run their social media presence. I think in the case of larger companies, if you have a dedicated social media team, I think it's okay to divide them up or figure out how you're going to tackle different platforms. I think it is really hard to expect like linear television producers, while they can aid the social media team in like what are the right things to try to highlight. I think you really do need a dedicated team that is thinking about what works best on which platform. I think, I think that just has to be expressed. I think within that social media team, you have to decide which platforms do we think actually target our audience the best. And in that you kind of then need to decide for each of those platforms, what is our main goal on this and what do we think actually works for this. We know that on Twitter, video kind of works. Long videos definitely do not work. But Twitter is a lot about interactions and how can we get the people who are involved, and I'm talking specifically about shows, productions, that kind of thing. But I think this works for advertising as well. How can we get the brand involved or people involved and being part of the conversation on Twitter? Because that is a better way to sort of highlight than just sort of sending out blasts of, hey, look at this new product, or hey, look, we have a new episode and a clip. I think you have to figure out what your voice is on that. And then you have to figure out what your voice is for each thing. I also think you can't be scared, and anyone jump in if you think I'm wrong. You can't be scared of deciding that there may be a couple of platforms that you're just not going to play in. And that doesn't mean you don't carve some time out for someone on your staff to start to think about those other platforms. But, for now, for example, with Quibi, we're not really playing in TikTok other than a little advertising. And we're not really having our shows engage too much on TikTok because even though that is a Gen Z and younger audience, we haven't quite figured out what is the authentic voice of the brand. And TikTok is all about sort of, a level of authenticity that you can't fake. But I think you have to decide what can we focus on that's going to have the best return for you. And I think that's different for every show, every brand, that whole thing. But I would say don't be scared of being like, you know what, these two things are not necessarily worth our time and money. Doesn't mean you don't sit on a couple of handles and then kind of ruthlessly focus on where you think you can actually help grow your audience, and then decide what is the play for each of those individual things. But I think a dedicated social team is really, really important.
And Shawna, I totally agree and support everything you just said. I think I'm a firm believer in the in the mantra, just because you can doesn't mean you should. I look at it as if you're, as a brand, not willing to invest heavily in the right way in the experience, you shouldn't expect your audience to do that either. There are no accidents in digital. Things that work, look good, that feel right, that deliver for the audience are done because you have a lot of people behind you, behind that product, behind that social media, that video, what have you, that are really looking at this and figuring out the right way to do it, and also making sure that there's an actual need for that you're filling on that platform. So I think, I just totally agree that figure out what's appropriate for your brand or the messaging that you're trying to get out there, and then focus on that and do one thing really well. And if you do one thing really well, then do two things really well. And if you can afford it, then do three things really well. But I think it's important to not, just don't jump all over the place just because you feel like you need to be there, because it generally, you're going to spread yourself too thin, and the audience is going to feel it, and you'll do a couple of things okay instead of doing one or two things really well.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think like a good follow-up to this for James is, and this is an audience question, is can you discuss how your digital team is organized? Do you have people dedicated to each platform, and do you oversee them all? And like I know that every different social media platform has its own expectations for how content's delivered and how it's packaged. So can you talk a little bit about that, how your team's organized and how you guys approach that?
Sure. So one of the things, the NewsHour is we're not huge, but but I will say we are mighty, and we work across platforms, across lanes, across silos. It's a team that really believes in the mission, and as a result, there is less energy spent around whose job it is to do what per se, and a lot of focus on everybody working together to make sure that we're getting it done the right way. And so with that in mind, I mean, we do have a small team that's dedicated just towards video, but that video team is working really closely with the social team. We have a couple of folks who work on the social team that handle everything from building Instagram stories to posting those YouTube polls. We have an engagement editor, and all she does is find new ways to connect with our audiences. But those teams work really close with the larger editorial team. So the woman who is overseeing, say, edits for an article on the website is also helping with the language for the Instagram story and might be looking at the language for the poll. So I would say in our case, it's more about how do we serve our audience day in and day out. And we have certainly people need to be specialized in certain elements, but if everybody is looking at the bigger goal, it's a lot easier to move something through our team and get it out there and published versus having things more siloed.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense, James. Throwing it back to Shawna. This is another question that we had come in. This is from Kelly Collis, and she asks, what are some indicators you are seeing with audience behavior to view and listen to content on the app as opposed to traditional linear television? And I know, Shawna, your background between Meet the Press and HBO was very much focused on linear and the television format. What are you seeing in this audience, this kind of younger millennial app audience?
I think one thing we have seen that makes me think they are willing to sort of come to our app for news content is, for example, this week with the announcement of Kamala Harris being Joe Biden's VP, we did see, like, we saw a little uptick in the numbers. And we sort of, like, I have a pretty good idea of what the baseline is, and it changes clearly. The data is a little weird since we are like constantly adding more people to the platform in general, like more subscribers every single day. So like comparing, June to now is a weird thing to do, but like even just looking at the week's worth of data that I had, people were interested in the fact that she was chosen, and definitely in much higher numbers clicked on that episode of NBC's show in the evening. We also, it was also a clue because NBC produces on weekdays a morning report and an evening report. And just by sheer fact that the evening report comes on at we posted around 6 p.m. Eastern, that means there's sort of less time in the day for someone to actually watch that show because we're also competing with the time they go to bed. So more viewers tend to watch the morning show because we try to have it on the platform by about 6:30 in the morning. But we saw a spike. And what I take that to mean is people did want that news information from us. Now, I also believe, and we haven't done enough sort of focus grouping for me to back this up. And even if we did, I wouldn't be able to tell you because my NDA is an issue. But my personal belief, being very careful about that, is that the audience that's willing to watch news on our platform is a very news literate audience. Like they're clearly getting news from other places because we are competing with a lot of entertainment stuff on our platform. So if you've come to Quibi and you're willing to watch news, we think that you really, really want that information, at least for now, until we grow a much larger subscriber base. And so one, it goes back to the idea of making sure we're adding value, because my belief is that that person is getting like general updates and they are looking at Twitter and that kind of thing. And two, if they believe they're going to have some added value, they are going to click on our actual episodes. And like I said, with Biden's choice of Harris, that evening's episode, we saw a spike.
Cool. James, I want to go to your presentation, and you brought up testing. You talked about the importance of testing, and then it came up multiple times after that. I'm just curious, how do you test? What does that process look like?
So it starts off by deciding what it is that you are hoping to achieve. So in our case, I'll use that example that I did where we restarted the stream and we saw this happen again. So what we want to do is, the question I'm asking in that point is, can we double or triple the reach and the concurrent viewers that we have for a major event on Facebook? Once you've got that, you know what you're trying to achieve, then you're just working with your team to make sure everybody's on the same page. They know what the expectations are, and then you just start trying it over and over again. And in my experience, some of these things could just be hunches that don't need to be laid out in a larger template or entered into a spreadsheet, but some of them are. And so if you're trying to track something over time, you can build a spreadsheet and you can put in the analytics behind it and look for trends. Or you can follow some hunches and move through that process much faster.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I saw one last question. It's a real quick one, and both of you can answer it. And Shawna, you kind of already touched on it, which is a big part of what Quibi is. But in your guys' experience, what's the optimum length of videos? And I guess it's obviously going to vary from platform to platform. But James, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so one of the things I always say about when I get this question is it really depends on what your audience is looking for. There's a myth that people today don't have long attention spans. It's not true. If that was true, you wouldn't have Netflix with a bazillion shows and all the long form programming that is out there today. People wouldn't be able to watch that stuff. It's highly dependent on what your audience is looking for. And once you've broken it into that, then you figure out what is it that they want. And as soon as you've delivered that, you stop. So as Shawna alluded to earlier, like Twitter, you could put a 20-second video up and a 2-minute video up. And I can almost guarantee you that over the course of 3 days, that 20-second video is going to have a longer overall watch time than the 2-minute video, because people don't watch 2-minute videos generally speaking on Twitter, but they will watch a 20-second video or 15-second video. So it really is, I wouldn't ever go into that question assuming that there's like the answer is 2 minutes. It really depends on the platform. But Shawna, I imagine you can probably weigh in on that with you're working right in the middle of that space right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the Twitter example is a good one. I would actually harken back to my time at Vice, because a lot of how Vice made its kind of bones, especially in sort of the documentary, docuseries space, is via YouTube. And when I was at Vice News Tonight, we would put up, look, our pieces would average somewhere between 6 and 7 minutes, but also like whole episodes, like, the Charlottesville episode we did is a 24-minute episode that aired originally on HBO. And people watched it start to finish, and people watch longer Vice stuff start to finish on YouTube. And Vice spent a lot of time like cultivating their YouTube audience because they wanted to put out this longer form stuff. And we would have crazy completion rates, but nobody thought at Vice that we should put our entire like 6-minute piece about anything on Instagram, for example. It's just not how people engage with the content, and the audiences come to the platforms for different things. I think in the case of Quibi, like we have said as part of like our app that there is a value proposition of we will either entertain, inspire, or inform you in less than 10 minutes. And so what we've done in some ways is basically told our audience, like, if that doesn't interest you, if you do want the 25-minute YouTube Vice piece, then you can go to YouTube for it. And we're totally fine with that. But this is what we are offering, and sort of based, especially on sort of social media traffic, we think we're sort of in the right framework to get a critical mass of people. But I don't think of Quibi as something that is the only thing that you are ever going to use to get your entertainment. Though if we could get there, wouldn't that be awesome for me personally? But overall, I think it really has to do with which platform you are programming for.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I appreciate both of you giving us your time today. I think that's all the time that we have. To those of you who asked questions, thank you. And to those of you who didn't get your questions answered, I'm sure if you reached out to both Shawna or James on Twitter or other social media platforms, they might be able to get back to you on that stuff. To everyone who joined us, thanks for popping in. We hope you had fun and that you learned a couple things along the way. And be on the lookout for our next webinar, which is next Thursday, August 20th. That will feature 3 agency leaders, our very own Todd Plotkin, CEO and founder of Greenbuzz, Lit Ott, president of 3Spot, and Ab Imam, founder of WDG. They'll be talking about the management of creative services to drive success in 2020 and beyond. It's going to be another awesome and informative session with tons of hands-on takeaways, so we hope to see you all there. And then finally, again, an enormous thank you to Shawna and James for sharing your time with us today. We'll see you all next week. Thanks for joining.